This is a panel on fellowships in the social sciences, and we've got two fantastic folks here. Nancy Kusmaul, Associate Professor of Social Work, who is a Health and Aging Policy Fellow, as well as an American Political Science Association Congressional Fellow last year, and also Christy Chapin, who is Associate Professor of History, who has had two recent fellowships, one with the Library of Congress Kluge Center, and currently is an American Council of Learned Societies, ACLS, Fellow as we speak. And then I also want to give special thanks to Rachel Brubaker, who is housed in the Dresher Center for the Humanities, but who does an amazing amount of work across the arts, humanities, and social sciences, working with faculty and graduate students sometimes to put together fellowship proposals. And she will talk today about some of the nuts and bolts of fellowship proposal submission, and also some of the considerations that you need to think about in terms of not only putting together your proposal, but also routing and so forth. So I am going to go ahead and turn it over to our panelists. We'll start with Nancy and then Christy, and then Rachel, and then we will have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So Nancy.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this, Christine. I'm excited to talk to you about my fellowship and sort of fellowships in general, and what I've learned through this process. I define fellowship. I know there's lots of things that have the fellowship name on it. I define a fellowship as something that's a short-term experience-based kind of thing that takes you maybe out of academia and connects you with other resources and people doing things in your area of interest. At least that's how I've defined it. My Health and Aging Policy Fellowship is designed to take experts in aging at all career stages and connect them with policymakers to the policy work and bring our expertise to people either on in executive branch agencies like Medicare and Medicaid, and to some kind of advocacy organization. And so our fellowship has a full-time and a part-time option. Options. At that point, they're getting ready to pivot anyway, where they've finished a PhD, maybe not quite ready to jump into academia yet, or are ready for some kind of career change, or take a sabbatical to do that kind of work. Other option is a part-time option where you're doing it for roughly 20% of your time. And that's what I did. I did the part-time option. For most of the part-time fellows in the country, they fly in 2 or 3 days a month to do some fellowship activity and do things more remotely. I had intended, given our proximity to Washington, to be on the ground kind of 1 day a week and do it that way, which I did for about 7 weeks before COVID hit. So the American Political Science Association Fellowship, you can do it where really what they do is they bring a bunch of different fellowship programs together, and they provide the bulk of the orientation to Congress, civics on steroids boot camp to get people situated in what it looks like to influence policy, mostly on the Hill. Their focus is mostly in Congress, but sort of extends to the other fellowship programs that are a part of it. So I know that there are some folks in political science. I know Tyson Kings Meadows was an APSA fellow, and there's, I think, a couple of other folks who applied and maybe not gotten it, but who've looked to do that from the political science lens. But as a health and aging policy fellow, we'd be a larger pool and go through their orientation and follow through with that larger cohort as well, which is why I sort of had 2 fellowships in one. For me, this was not about that scholarly productivity that, work towards tenure, which is why I chose to do it when I did. This was a fellowship that was on my radar for a long time, and the timing was never quite right. And I had been told by other people who did the fellowship that if you want to advance your scholarly agenda, if you want to publish, if you're doing those things that will help you get tenure, this is not the way. So I applied in the year that my tenure packet was being reviewed, which was great. I figured it would give me something to do in that long period of time where I was not thinking about what my dossier was doing on the other part of campus. And that actually worked rather well. And as a part-time fellow, I didn't have to stop doing what I was doing, though I was able to use some fellowship money to buy myself out of a course each semester, which is the way I gave myself the time to do it. In my fellowship, even though we're part-time, that orientation boot camp is pretty much full-time for 6 weeks. And there were part-time fellows who were remote teaching back home while they were doing it, and that was a little crazy. So I was very glad that I had my course buyout that semester to give me the time to do that, especially since I was commuting from Howard County to DC 5 days a week, which was pretty crazy. I'm looking at our bullet points that we put together before we put this together, and what to discuss with your chair is really, I think, those demands on your time as far as you know them ahead of time, what the fellowship is going to expect from you. Were a nice way to make it clear what my time was. And as a part-time fellow, pre-COVID, it was much easier to be distinct about this is the time I'm working on my fellowship. I'm not on campus. I'm not doing these things today. Today's a fellowship day. And, my chair knew that that was it was, oh, Wednesday's your DC day. Okay, I'll see you later in the week. That, like everything else, got harder to draw those boundaries once everything was remote, because I wasn't doing full days on the fellowship anymore. I was picking up a fellowship meeting before switching to class, before switching to, student issues, and so it was harder to carve out that time post fellowship. But someday I imagine we'll go back to normal campus life, and my advice to you would be is if you get a fellowship, be clear about carving out the time that you're supposed to be doing fellow like activities. I think that's kind of my story in a nutshell, and I'm excited to hear about Christy's story. So I will turn it over to her.
Thanks so much for that, Nancy. Actually, that's really helpful because it sounds like your fellowship is very different from my fellowship. So it offers a nice wide range of experiences. So I'm mostly familiar with full-time fellowships for research and writing. Some are, for research specifically or writing specifically. For fellowships for people in social sciences and the humanities, the neat thing about it is really you can find them for all different stages of your career, whether you're some will only let you apply if you're, for example, the Kluge I did at the Library of Congress, you could only have received your PhD within the last 5 or 7 years. I think it was within 7 years. So that was for junior scholars, even though the Kluge Center has different fellowships for people who are mid-stage and then people who are senior scholars. And that's just one example. ACLS also has different types of fellowships for different stages of your career and also stages of your project. Some fellowships you won't want to apply to until you're close to the end of a project, usually a book project, whereas others, they encourage people to get them for research. For history, we spend many years doing research because we usually travel to archives. I know a lot of people in the social sciences do some of that. But the good news is there are fellowships for all different types of activities. A couple of things I've taken away from my experience is to read the directions carefully. You might be surprised how many people get kicked out of the process because they didn't read the directions carefully. And it's one reason you will love working with Rachel. Because if not to put everything on her, but she will catch things that you miss. And if you didn't have her, I would still say the same thing. Rachel would know better than me. I bet you, I would venture to say at least a quarter to a third of fellowship applications are tossed out because they just don't comply with the directions. And they might have a fantastic project and it might be beautifully written, but it didn't work because they didn't read the directions. So read the directions over and over and over again. I've actually messed up myself on a fellowship that I'm pretty sure I would have gotten, but I just didn't notice that there was one thing I needed to do. If I had done it, I'm sure I would have gotten the fellowship because they actually gave me an honorable mention. Long story short, read the directions carefully. All right. I feel like the thing you spend the most time on, of course, with the application is your essays. Up front, I will say when you're preparing, if you have a semester where you're preparing more than one fellowship application or even just one, the thing that the process going through all our head is, I don't have time for this. I'm teaching and I'm trying to get this deadline and I don't have time for it. And you will be so annoyed. And if you're applying for more than one fellowship, you'll probably have like a 3-page statement and a 5-page statement and a 7-page statement and a 10-page statement. You'll never be allowed to use this exact same essay for numerous ones. But the reason I bring this up is because I want to encourage you to go ahead and go through with the process because it's almost always worth it for the quality of your overall project, whether or not you get the fellowship. There's almost never been a time where I've been required to write something about the project I'm working on that it hasn't actually ended up being useful for me as far as conceptualizing the total project and trying to figure out what exactly it is I'm arguing and how I want to structure it. Even if I end up changing it down the line, it's a good time for me to step back from a project and think about it big picture. So I want to encourage you, please apply. Don't shoot yourself in the foot by telling yourself you don't have time to apply. Okay. Of course, you'll spend the most time on your essays. Again, I cannot say enough about how helpful Rachel is in this part of the application process. Two very important things you're going to want to do in the essay, among numerous other things. Of course, citing the right scholarship, showing why your project is going to bring new knowledge into the world, into the scholarly fields. But two things you really want to hit is why your project is important. And the second thing is making it interesting and understandable to readers from all types of backgrounds and disciplines. So I mentioned those two things because it's funny. I feel like oftentimes some people have no problem saying why their project is important, but then those are the people that might have more time making it understandable to all the disciplines or even interesting. So for example, before I was working on the political economy of the American healthcare system, obviously not really difficult for me to explain why this is important. Currently, I'm working on the political economy of the financial sector. Again, not very hard for me to explain why this is important. What is hard is for me to write something that doesn't make people, I always say, want to stick a fork in their eye. I mean, how do you write about finance for, if you have to assume, okay, maybe I'll have a political scientist, somebody from gender studies, a Chinese, a historian of China. Assume that the people reading your applications are not anywhere near your field. And so this is where, and I've actually learned a lot about this from my department at Umbc, is storytelling and crafting a narrative that even if you're talking about something as boring as banking and finance, that you're pulling in the reader. And there are ways you can definitely do this. Again, my colleagues have been very helpful in showing me how to do it. For example, I had an essay for my current project, and I can't remember it might have been for the Kluge Fellowship. And at the time, Kate Brown was one of my readers. She was one of our colleagues in the history department who's now at MIT. She also won zillions of fellowships. And she had me go back and put in a paragraph at the beginning that talked about the way finance has changed from the point of view of the regular, everyday individual. About how, or worker even, how the worker used to be a worker in a factory, tools, tool bench, finance was not something the regular person took part in, but nowadays with 401ks and CDs and IRAs and all types of different benefits that come along with your job, and computers and people trading online, about how it's changed. And it was just one little paragraph, and I'm not explaining it very well, but if you read the paragraph, you would see what I'm saying, that it just helped before the reader dove in, no matter what their background is. Okay, they kind of understand what I'm talking about. They can relate. They're not immediately put off by the topic. So there was just that, old thing of drawing in the reader. And then, of course, staying away from jargon. It's so easy for us to think that we're writing clearly because everybody in not even our discipline, but our little subfield in our discipline knows what we're talking about. Be very careful. That's why you want as many people as possible to read your essay. And if you can get, especially people who don't do exactly what you do, even if they're in the same discipline, but work on different types of subjects, because they'll be able to point out areas where you know what you're saying, but it's not necessarily clear to the reader. The average educated reader is what you want. So yeah, that would be a huge one. In my department, when I was hired, I was told that we have a culture of grant writing in our department. And really all that requires is kind of saying it and then being open to reading your colleagues' applications and also passing yours around. It's in history, we've done it in different ways. Sometimes you just do it individually. Other times we've also we can't now because of COVID, but we had times where we would pre-circulate people's, whether it's a chapter or fellowship application, and then meet together for a beer and a burger and talk about it, a group of us. But because it's important and because we've said it's important, obviously, if a colleague sends me their application, I'm going to take it very seriously and go over it with a fine-tooth comb, just as I know they would do for me. So it makes all our applications so much better. Let's see, what to expect. That completely depends on the fellowship. That's why I'm so glad Nancy told us about hers, because hers is very different from the fellowships I've had, have all revolved around research and writing. But you can still get an idea of how different they could be, in that my Library of Congress one, that one was, you did have to be in residence. And I also did have to, just like Nancy's doing now, commute to the library. And that was a great stage of the project for me to be doing that, because I was in the research phase, and it was great for me to be going to their manuscript rooms and their reading rooms and looking through all the primary sources and manuscript papers and collections. And frankly, it was fantastic. It was like being at Disney World every day. It was awesome. So that was great. But now I have an ACLS fellowship, and I don't have to be in residence anywhere, which is better suited for where I am now with mostly writing, because I've done a lot of the research. So that can be tricky, because a lot of people, sometimes it'll be an in residence fellowship, and that can be hard because you're trying to pay your rent or your mortgage back home, plus you have to relocate. So that's something you'll hear a lot of people. And it also can be harder if you have young children and all kinds of different difficulties you have to negotiate. So I will put that out there. That can be hard to figure out when a good time is. Finally, the last thing I'll just say is what to discuss with your department chair. It's going to really depend on your department, the way you work things. Because we are a department where we really encourage everybody to go out for fellowships. I once had 2 fellowships in a row. So basically what I do is I don't apply for fellowships unless I have the permission of my chair. It's kind of like she'll say, okay, you've had your time, now you can't for a while. And I'm happy to be here and pick up extra duties for when I was gone so that I can support my colleagues who are now out on a fellowship. That's a great thing. If you have a department that's really bought into this, then, I'm more than happy to do more than my part so I can cover another several people to be out when I am there. And I think that's really great. We have that in the history department because we all have just great, I feel like pretty good attitudes about it. I'm more than happy to help out when I am there, and they do the same for me. So I guess just trying to figure out the way your department works things. But I will just, one last thing is it doesn't take that much to turn your department into a place where, people are applying for a lot of fellowships. I think it's just, takes a little will, maybe a brief conversation or so, and a faculty meeting, and the willingness to read each other's materials. And that is all. So Rachel, I think, do you want to go next?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Christy. I also will have a couple of slides to share. But before I do that, I wanted to just briefly give a plug for some of the internal resources that we have on campus. Some of them obviously have changed due to some of the economic circumstances we're going through. But each of the CAS centers does offer fellowships, internal fellowships. The Dresher Center has a residential fellowship program in the center. Actually, our fellowship application for next fall is due this Sunday, the 15th. We all have summer fellowships that we're offering. In fact, the competition's being open this Sunday as well, the 15th, and will run until February 15th. And so there's options on campus, and the reason I want to plug those is because a fellowship is a big undertaking. As Christy said, kind of crafting a proposal, the work that goes into it, the time, the thinking, the thought process, and when you want to apply is a really big undertaking. Also, the stage of your career, your departmental considerations. Yet the internal fellowships, I think, really give you a good opportunity to work on that proposal, to join an intellectual community within the college that will be supportive of some of the work that you're doing, give you a chance to maybe get your proposal, your research to a stage where you then are ready to take it out to an external funder. So I first want to give that as an important consideration in terms of the timing and how you go about this. I'm going to attempt to share my screen with just 2 slides. Oops, can you all see it? Okay. So I really wanted to talk a little bit about the institutional considerations in applying for fellowships at UMBC. So I thought it was important that you all take a look at this page in the faculty handbook in the section on leave policies, because there is a process that we need to go through. While fellowships are designed for individuals, whether they're residential fellowships or portable, flexible fellowships like the type that Christy has right now, where she can work on it, from her bedroom as she needs to. The university regards them in a way that that you're going to take a fellowship leave. Now, Nancy's experience was a little bit different than the fellowships that I largely work on, and most of my work, as Christina said, is with fellowships. In that fellowship proposals do require that we route the application through to the Office of Sponsor Programs. And routing, as many of you know, is basically the process of seeking approval from the institution at different levels to go forward and submit an external application, whether it be a grant or fellowship application. So even though most fellowship applications are for individuals and submitted by individuals, they still require that UMBC approval to move forward before they're submitted. So, keep that in mind. So the faculty handbook specifically says that even if it doesn't require an institutional signature, there needs to be that form of approval so that it's recorded, and so that when you then, if you receive the award and then go and apply for fellowship leave, that there is a record of this fellowship application. Because when an award comes in, and if you're permitted to have the university administer it, you are going to apply for leave, and a project will be set up through the university's grants office. So, there is administrative reasons for why we need to make sure that the university is looped in and that we go through the right process. I also wanted to just kind of give you a sense of some of the institutional considerations in the process that we go through. And then also give you some tips. So the first is to say that you need to build a timeline for your application. So let's say that your sponsor has a deadline of November 16th to submit an application. that is basically the final date. You have to back up a certain amount of time in advance to actually develop your fellowship, to route it through the university, and then to be ready to send it on to your sponsor. So my first point is that you make sure that you build routing into your timeline. And there's the process for routing a fellowship application actually is not as complex as routing a grant application, I found, in that we can route an application with a near final version of your statement of work, your narrative, a budget, which usually for a stipend, for a fellowship will be a stipend. And a stipend generally is intended as salary replacement for the fellow. And also because the university has a process that when you do apply for fellowship leave, and the stipend is supporting your salary for that period, that there's also a continuation of your fringe benefits, which is really important. So you want to be able to take your fellowship knowing that you're institutionally secure. So there's another form that we generally fill out, which is called a cost share form for the continuation of fellowship fringes. So those are really important elements that we need to have in a routing before we can even begin it. So my point is that you need to prepare for the routing process, and that generally is about 5 to 7 days. Routing requires that we have approval from first you on your proposal, then your department chair. So as Christy and Nancy have said, there's a lot of consideration in terms of your discussion with your chair about taking your fellowship when you apply for it, the implication on teaching and in your department. But you also need to loop in your chair because they are part of that approval process as we route through the university. After the chair approves, then it goes to the dean's office, and then finally to the sponsored programs office. When it gets to the sponsored programs office, you need to build an additional couple of days in because the sponsored programs office for the institution is going to want to see a complete application. So during the routing process, you are basically finishing your application. You're putting it into the sponsor's portal for applications. You're filling out the forms, attaching your narrative, your bibliography, whatever other materials are required. The sponsor programs office is going to want to see it at that version. So before you submit it. So then I will work with you to make sure that it gets put into your application. Sponsor programs reviews it, generally gives a straightforward approval, then you're told you can submit. So a lot of times, and I think we're kind of changing this a bit, I've been working with faculty who have already gone ahead and submitted an application without all of us knowing about it. I think we're now, coming to a point where we all have sort of a common understanding that there is this routing process that's required, and we build time into it for that. I will also say that if you were going to apply for a fellowship, an external support fellowship through the university, you should also become principal investigator PI eligible. And that is necessary in order to be able to submit for funding and also receive awards at UMBC. So there's a process for that. So what I usually tell faculty who I work with is come to me early. Come to me even before you're ready to even think about applying for a fellowship. We can look at the landscape together. We can discuss the stage of your project. As Christy said, you really should apply when it's, you have the best you can offer to the sponsor. And also your life, if you're able to travel, if it's a residential fellowship, there's a lot of considerations. So I like to work with faculty early and make sure that we're all prepared so that the actual fellowship process, the submission process, is really smooth and pretty straightforward. And I guess the last thing I would say is that, each project is different and each sponsor is very different. A lot of the work I do, as Christy said, is kind of working in tandem with the faculty member to kind of look for some of the nuances that I know that we need to address at the university. So for example, can indirect costs be charged on an award? Quite frankly, that really is not typical for fellowships. However, there is a process that we have at the university to make sure that we document that that F&A, indirect costs, cannot be charged. Can the university administer the award? While fellowships are all given to individuals, some fellowship sponsors expect that probably their fellows will be asking to have their universities administer their award, and there's some really good reasons to have them do that. It makes it a very smooth process that you continue to get paid, that your fringe benefits continue. If the sponsor says, absolutely not, we only award to an individual fellow, there are tax implications for the fellow. You will get a 1099 form. There's just a little bit more coordination issues with payroll to make sure that the fringes continue as they should. Also in the faculty handbook, there's a note that says that most fellowships do not cover your full academic year salary or partial salary. So the university and many universities have a policy of topping up the amount of the stipend award to make sure that you are compensated your full academic year salary while you're on fellowship leave. So of course, if the university is helping to administer that award, we can make sure that all works smoothly. So it's to your benefit. I think the dean's office, Permindo, will also agree that it's really to your benefit if there is an option to have the university administer the award, that you do that. So that does make it then that much more important that we do work through the procedures and the processes that the university has set up to make sure that routing goes smoothly. And then one final thing that I would say, having worked on a lot of fellowships, is that most fellowships are not funded on the first go around. Same with grants. It's just a reality, and it's even tighter. Particularly, I think, in my experience, those fellowships that are designed to be portable and flexible, such as the ACLS that Christy's on right now, the National Endowment for the Humanities, which does have many social science faculty do apply for NEH fellowships as well. As funding gets tighter, there's even more wonderful projects that are out there and being submitted for fellowships. It's not uncommon to submit for a fellowship, not get it, and then try again the following year, or when you feel that your project is maybe better suited or fit to apply again. One of the things that I found is very helpful for faculty is to request the reviewer's comments. A number of sponsors, those that are smaller or don't have the capability or resources, will tell you up front, we can't promise you that you'll get the reviewer's comments. But ACLS, NEH will provide them, and it could be extremely helpful in helping you kind of reconfigure, rethink some of your proposal for the next go around. So that's kind of my nuts and bolts and a couple of suggestions that I have, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
So yeah, Rachel, if you can unshare, that'd be great. And then we can all see each other again. As you're doing that, I also want to just circle back to a moment about routing. So those of you in the social sciences who tend to work with MyPower for your grant submission, MyPower is also available to help you administer fellowships, but often we will still work with Rachel on the development of that proposal too. So it's flexible and we can sort of work across. There was recently a faculty member in the social sciences who applied for a prestigious external award. Rachel and I helped on the narrative piece and on the application piece. And then if the award is received, MyPower would be the one administering. So there is a lot of sort of collaboration, and that also makes it even more important to work ahead. So as soon as you think you might be applying for a fellowship, if it is a fellowship and you're in the social sciences, you can reach out to MyPAR and Rachel at the same time, or you can reach out, to Rachel first, then bring in MyPAR later, or you can talk to me or and so forth. So just letting you all know that we're all here to help you. There's no such thing as, having made a mistake in who you contact, because it's really good for us all to be in touch so that you can get the best support that you need. So yes, as Rachel said, let's go ahead and open it up for Q&A.
I'm sorry to interject real quickly. I just want to one more time to say I cannot say enough good things about working with Rachel. She really does. She's such a fantastic resource. So please, and one other thing too is she talked about applying for fellowships over and over. Don't worry about that at all. Like, I've never applied for an NEH, but when I do, in my mind, it's going to be a 3-year process. I'm going to assume that I am not going to get the NEH the first year, at least, if not 2 or 3. So don't at all feel bad about thinking about fellowships as something that you apply to over and over again.
I guess one other thing I wanted to mention was that, in terms of what is kind of inherent in most fellowship applications is most of them require a couple of letters of recommendation. Occasionally they require an institutional letter. And if it does require an institutional letter, then you're definitely going to be routing, because there needs to be that process of approval in order to get the letter. In terms of the recommenders, the letters to apply for, to request to go into your application, I would just say, be really careful that you pay attention to the timing in terms of whether your letters of reference have to come in at the same time that your application is submitted, or if you're going to be required to give the contact information, and the sponsor will reach out and get that letter of recommendation. And also give some really careful thought to who you select as your recommender. Maybe Nancy and Christy can provide some insight into that. But in my experience, particularly with early career faculty, they want to go to their dissertation director, an advisor. You really need to give some thought to choosing someone who knows your work and can speak to your work. A lot of the comments that I've seen in applications that are not funded include comments such as the letter of recommendation looked like it was a cookie cutter letter. It didn't really give the readers a sense that the recommender understood the project or really knew the scholar's work that well. So please give some thought to that. I'm also noticing that sponsors are now starting to also ask for samples of writing along with fellowship narratives. And they can be from like 5 pages to 10 pages. Sometimes they want to see either part of the project or something that's related to it. They want to give a sense of the writing. So, don't leave this to the last minute. You may be editing your writing sample at the same time that you're preparing your proposal narrative. Okay.
Can I just add that in terms of, Christy was talking about having other people reading your narrative, and there's sort of, I guess, 2 schools of thought on that. The people who have never had this kind of funding, which is finding out who else on campus, who else in your network have maybe had this fellowship before, and having them take a look at your work. And also, to Rachel's point about your recommenders, if your recommenders have read iterations of your proposal, then they will have a sense of what your work is and what your work is for this fellowship. So.
Yeah, and be careful. You kind of have to know about your recommenders. I know from experience that some recommenders might like you, but they're still not going to write a good letter. Some people come for their different traditions in Europe, for example, about the way they write their letters. So sometimes, people are just quirky that way. So you want to find out, because you'll hear some people have reputations for just writing bad letters. Whereas others, will put in the time to write a good, really in-depth one. So just more information about picking your letter writers.
Great advice, everybody. Questions?
I actually have a question. So this is actually continuing a conversation that we had at the social science coffee hour, I think last month. So, I mean, I would just be curious to hear where people are finding grant opportunities. I mean, well, fellowship opportunities rather. I mean, I still get an email from my previous institution, which lists fellowship opportunities in a monthly blast, and it is a really long and intimidating list to go through. And my project it involves research in multiple countries and cuts across a few fields. So that doesn't usually narrow down that doesn't narrow down the opportunities that much. So I'm wondering where has been most useful to find fellowship opportunities for everyone.
Well, I can answer that. I develop a monthly email blast that goes out to the college of grant and fellowship opportunities. And when I try to, they're curated. So basically there's the evergreens, there's the ones that everybody looks for, like the ACLS, the NEH, a couple of the other big foundations. But I also try to keep in mind the lead time. So, you know, if it's something that catches my eye that has a deadline in a week, I'm not going to put it in there. It just doesn't make any sense for that. There are other colleges and universities that are very well resourced to be able to develop these, you know, generative lists of fellowships applications. You probably, Brian, may know about HNet. HNet announcements includes both call for papers and conferences, but also funding opportunities through grants and fellowships. Some of them, a number of them tend to be obscure or very specific, but I found that, you know, I can usually pick out a couple of interesting ones. In my opinion, I don't want to get too specific. I do want to keep in mind what I know about our faculty's research interests and projects. So, you know, I won't go for something that just seems a little too, you know, it's for somebody in a sub field or, you know, somebody they already know when I craft those announcements. But that said, that doesn't cover it all. So what I do like to do, particularly for faculty who are in their first or second year, is to meet with them and get a sense of what they're doing, to get a sense of how they're connected professionally, to see what sorts of funding is out there for their projects so that either colleagues have received, you know, who funds that type of work, and then kind of start scanning the landscape and looking for what's available and what's possible. I will also say that sponsors will change their programs. So for example, the ACLS fellowship that Christy has this year, she couldn't apply for in this current round. They specifically have decided to go for early career faculty this year and maybe next year, you know, given the pandemic and economic considerations. Also some programs that, you know, are kind of have been considered evergreens, like the Burkhardt early career fellowship is gone. They've closed that. So, you know, that's why I think it's helpful to speak with someone, me or someone like me, who maybe can give a look over the landscape and see what's available.
And one thing, I'm so sorry. Did I step on something?
No.
The only thing I was gonna add something, because when Rachel was talking, it made me remember something that I think is important to tell you, is you might see a fellowship and think that it's not for you, but wait before you completely strike it off your list. For example, the Library of Congress. I was like, I don't need you to do research at the Library of Congress. I'm, you know, finance. They had so much stuff that was so fantastic for my project. There's a political economy, just 1 week fellowship at the Hoover Institution, you know, out on the West Coast. Again, I didn't think I needed anything there, but I just went through their papers, and they had there's a fantastic collection of papers that was really good for me to go look at too. So keep that in mind. Don't immediately take things off your list because you're not 100% sure that they have the sources or what you need there.
And I would say some fellowships, so like my fellowship has a very deep alumni network, and they're is very clear about this is our network. Once a fellow, always a fellow is something they like to say a lot. So chances are, especially if it's specific to your field or subfield, know somebody in that network. And, I'd say talk to as many of those people as you can. And that's another good way to figure out if it's a good fit.
Yeah, and
Those are
another
really
thing.
good points. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, but just picking up on what Nancy said real quickly is that I've had a lot of people contact me to ask for my materials because it helps give them us, like if they want to apply to Library of Congress or ACLS or whatever, I think it's a really smart thing to do, is because even if they work on something completely different, they can just get a sense of, okay, this application was successful. Let me see how she did it. And I think that's very helpful too.
I was just going to add that some of the larger sponsors that maintain lists of who they funded will also include little synopses of the projects. So I think it's really useful to also get a sense of the type of projects that they're interested in. Also, a couple other things that if you're applying to a sponsor primarily to be able to work in their archives or within their collections, really give some good thought about how you frame the work that you will be doing there. They want to know what you're going to be working on. So Christy's saying that she, found that there's collections that she would use at the Hoover Institute or at the Kluge at the Library of Congress. Be specific about what collections you're going there to use. Make it feel like, they really want you there because you're going to access their materials. A number of residential fellowships also they're intellectual communities. So, while you're there to research and have time to write, and that's pretty much what a fellowship is to give you the time to do. You also will be participating in different opportunities. Some fellowships require presentations either in programs. Some of them require some teaching, although most of the faculty fellowships that I work on are with people who are primarily there for research purposes. But most faculty come back from fellowships, residential fellowships, really energized and jazzed, having, new connections, expanded colleague networks, and really kind of, drawing from that. So that should be also included in a fellowship application, is that you're there because you want to be there and you want to take advantage of what they have to offer.
Such good advice. I want to circle back to on the how to find the funding announcements. We maintain some on our website, and I definitely want to put in a plug for just finding grants and fellowship compendiums that are sent out to subscribe to. There are many of those that you can just sign up for email alerts and so forth. But yeah, Rachel, in answer to Nancy's question, if someone wants to email you to be added to your funding list that comes out through the Dresher Center, are you able to do that for them?
Well, I actually send to the CAS list, faculty list. If you're not receiving it, certainly let me know. But I think most people do receive it. How you access it.
Some of us are CAS orphans. We're not in CAS, but we do social science research.
So just email me and just tell me you want to be added to the list, and I will definitely make sure that you're added to the list.
Yeah, great.
If there's time, Christine and Rachel, can you talk about the Fulbright Fellowship also, that we really encourage, that the university helps faculty a lot to support? If maybe you can mention that.
Absolutely. So often in years past, we've done a Fulbright workshop basically right about now during International Education Week, but we're actually going to this year move it to February. So it'll be sometime in mid-February. Brian Souders is a great resource. He's really our Fulbright specific liaison. So just stay tuned for announcements about that fellowship workshop that will go, research award, I guess, that will go out to be held in mid-February. So Rachel, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add on that, but we'll also have a program officer from Fulbright present at that workshop.
Just to say that, it's regarded as a fellowship here. I know Fulbright does not pay institutions, they pay individuals, but we still have to go through our internal process. So, yeah. One other thing is that there are every year a couple of opportunities. Some are not every year, some are every other year, that are actually institutional opportunities where sponsors will contact the university and say that they have fellowship opportunities and we can nominate faculty to apply for those. In previous years, the Andrew Carnegie Fellowships have been one. The NEH Summer Stipend Program is another one. They're called limited submission opportunities. So those have a slightly different process in that we set up an internal process to be able to do kind of a pre-review of applications. So the call comes out first for an internal process. Applications are submitted and reviewed and vetted internally, and then nominations are forwarded that way. Generally, then either I or Christine or another center will work with the faculty to complete their application, their proposal, workshop it a little bit, and then they will apply for the fellowship. So every year there's a couple of those as well.
So I see Erica and Nancy talking about policy fellowships. Absolutely. As Nancy mentioned, also Tyson King Meadows had a policy fellowship recently. I invited him to be on this panel as well, but he's on sabbatical at the moment, but I don't think he would be opposed to chatting with anybody over email if you have questions. And thank you, Nancy and Chapin and Christy, for putting your email addresses there. Rachel, Noor had a question about whether it's still worth it to try to apply for some fellowships, even if you don't meet some of the requirements, such as citizenship. Do you have a perspective on that?
Well, most fellowships will specifically say what the status needs to be, whether you have to have a green card status or you're applying, or whether you need to have citizenship. I think you need to be really careful and make sure that you can meet those criteria before you even consider applying. A couple of years ago, I was working with a faculty member who had an interview. She was, going forward with getting her residential status. And it was really precarious because, things were slowing down. She wasn't sure whether she should go ahead. The sponsor said, well, if we make this award, you need to have your status, you need to have your residency, before, in order to receive an award. As it turned out, she got the interview and was able to set it up. But my feeling is that if that's something that is going to be something that's a disqualifier immediately, whether you have the most terrific project or not, consider making sure that you're at the right point in that process before you consider applying. So, but that said, I'm also more than willing to contact the sponsor and ask. Again, a number of them will make it clear up front, but sometimes you don't know. Sometimes sponsors just kind of have very cursory kind of information on their websites about what the expectations are, and you do need to kind of tease some of that out. So I would say, maybe come to me and we can discuss some of it.
Great. And I think we have time for one or maybe two final questions. Anybody have anything else? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much, Nancy, Christy, Rachel. Really fantastic advice. And thank you all for coming. Yeah, great. Feel free to email our participants as well. It sounds like they are generously available to talk with folks offline. Thank you all again so much, and good luck to everybody preparing those fellowship proposals. Thanks.